I think, there we go, we're live. Okay, so welcome. We are now being recorded. I forget exactly what we usually say for our other meetings, but if you have any concerns about that, you can turn off your camera or whatever. We're also being broadcast live on YouTube, and this will be available later. But we do love that people have signed in and can participate. Oops. Okay, I'm getting an echo. How do I? Oh, I bet I have the YouTube window open. Yes.
Yeah, you'll get the feedback, the echo from YouTube.
Can I close that, or do I have to leave it open?
You can close it.
Okay. Apologies to everyone. This is the first time I've used this setup. Anyways, so we're glad that people are logged in and participating live, because we do want this to be interactive. I'm trying to allow time at the virtual user groups to have sort of a big presentation, but also give a few minutes for people to do quick shares of other things they're doing. And I have something I want to share, and I know PW Panda might, if he's still around, maybe can take a minute optionally at the end. So our topic today, though, is porting themes from Drupal 7. And Jen, I have something worked out. I know she's been staying up last night working on this. So why don't you go ahead and show us what you got?
Sure. I'm going to see if I can share my screen here. But essentially, Tim and I spent some time yesterday reviewing themes that we thought might be good to do a live port of during today's meeting. We found one that's fairly simple, so I think we'll have time to get through all of the big concepts. And then hopefully we'll be able to follow that up with questions about how this might relate to other more complicated themes. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on my screen sharing. It doesn't look like I can share everything. Okay, so I'm going to end up changing screens to show different things. So if I end up switching and you guys can't see what I'm doing, let me know. I'll ask when I do it and you can tell me what you're looking at. Okay, so right now you should see the Aberdeen theme. This is the theme that I've chosen to do a live port of. I found this by searching for modules on Drupal.org that were labeled, or themes that were labeled as seeking new maintainers. I thought that might be an easy one to port and maybe contribute back to if they were interested in adding a new maintainer. This one's very straightforward. I also reviewed the code repository on Git for Drupal, and it looked like it had only a few template files. Page is one that'll trip people up when porting from Backdrop, so I wanted to make sure it had that one. And then also had a template.php file with a couple of PHP functions in it. This is actually not the current branch we're looking at now. But yeah, so it looked like a good one to port, so that's where I started. Normally, if I was going to port a theme, the first thing I would do is check the issue queue, and I would look for any issues that applied to the current version of the project. So in this case, I would search for Drupal 7 issues, and there aren't actually any patches here. If there were patches marked, reviewed, and tested by the community, I would start by committing those to the Drupal 7 code base. If there were ones that were marked needs review, I might review them and see if I thought they were ready to go in. And that way I would make sure that the Backdrop version of the project would be as up to date with the Drupal project as possible, and hopefully also help move that Drupal project forward a little bit by working on it for Backdrop. In this case, there aren't actually any issues that need to be worried about, which also made it a good one for a candidate for doing a port of today. It's fairly straightforward and there's nothing pending. So the next thing I did was download the theme and install it on a Drupal site. So what we're looking at now is a local copy of Drupal 7. Out of the box, Drupal had two blocks positioned in this theme. There's a search block and navigation block on the left-hand side. And so what I'm going to do when I set this theme up on Backdrop is build a similar experience so that I know that I'm looking at apples to apples when I'm comparing the two themes. So on my Backdrop site, I'm going to change the default layout to match what's going on approximately in the Drupal 7 theme. And this is a Drupal 7 theme that supports 3 columns. So if we wanted to do a 3-column layout, we could set that up We could place some blocks in the right sidebar on Drupal and then look at what they'd look like on Backdrop. But because out of the box it comes with only 2, the first thing I would do is change my default layout to Moscone. So this is going to be a left sidebar version of the layout. I'm also going to place those same 2 blocks in the left sidebar. So we had the search form with a label, and we had a navigation block. And I'm just going to change the title here so that it'll match what's going on in Drupal.
We're getting some feedback from someone other than myself. They might need to mute themselves. Thank you, that's better.
All right, so if I save this layout, we can go back and look at our about page. And you should see that we have approximately the same content, search box and navigation in the sidebar. And then on the Drupal 7 site, we have search box and navigation in the sidebar. So now at this point, what I would do is download the Drupal 7 theme, or in my case, I did a git clone from the Drupal 7 version, put it on my Backdrop site, just exactly as Drupal 7 theme would be. And so if you look at the appearance page, oh, sorry, I've already had this on earlier today, but it should not let me turn it on. There we go. It says it's not compatible with Backdrop, and that's because we have not yet updated any of the theme files to make it work with Backdrop. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and update that info file. So can you guys see my code right now? Or are you still looking at the Backdrop site?
Yes.
You can see the code. Okay, good. Just I wasn't sure that would work. Okay, so what we're looking at right now is the aberdeen.info file, and this is exactly as it would be in Drupal 7. So usually what I do when I'm starting to work on a Backdrop port of a module is I check out a new branch. So I'm not working on the 7.x branch from Drupal. So in this case, I've created a test branch called port or something for me to work on for now. So I feel confident in just modifying these files directly, and then later on we can clean them up and do what we need to. So in Backdrop, there's a couple of changes to the info file. We have a type line where we tell it it's a theme. And then we have, because this file is all nice and neat, I'm just going to clean it up the same way. And then where it says core 7.x, we're going to change this to Backdrop 1.x. I also know that in Backdrop, we do not have support for regions in the theme. This has been moved to layouts. So just to make this simple, for right now, I'm going to comment these out. If I can get my vertical selector to work. Shift, Alt, Shift, there we go. So I'm just going to comment out all of the regions because I know that that's not going to work for Backdrop. But I'm going to leave everything else the same. And then I'm going to go ahead and reload my themes page on Backdrop, my Backdrop site. And this is the way I start porting modules and stuff too. The first thing I do is update the info file and then turn it on and see what happens, how badly things explode. You'll notice I'm not doing this on like a real site. This is just sort of a empty, fresh install of Backdrop. So I'm not worried about risk to the particular site. I'm just working on the theme itself. So I'm going to take Aberdeen and enable and set default. All right, so now it'll say Aberdeen is now the default theme. So if I go back to the home page, it should look fairly broken. That's to be expected because all we did is change the info file. So what I'm going to then do is the one change that I think is most important that'll make your site actually work is renaming the template for page. So in Drupal 7, there was a file page.tpl.php that covered the layout of your site. In Backdrop, that page has been renamed to, or that template is the layout.tpl.php file. And in Backdrop, the page.tpl.php file is the one that in Drupal 7 was named html.tpl.php. So that's really confusing and it's going to break everything on your site if you don't fix that. So that's what I'm going to start off by doing is renaming my page template. I'm in the wrong place here. Hold on. Okay, no, I'm fine. Okay, so here's all the template files. What I don't actually want to use this page template just yet. I'm going to use it as a reference later. So the first thing I'm going to do is rename it to something my site's not going to use. So I'm going to move, maybe I'll do a git move, page template to layout. And you can name it whatever you want. I know I don't have a layout override called nope. So I'm going to rename this file layout-nope.tpl.php. And that'll prevent that file from being read. Can you guys see this text? Is this big enough? So I just renamed the page template to layout something. And then if I go back to my backdrop site and flush all the caches, or more importantly, rebuild the theme registry, it'll notice that the page template isn't there, and it'll load Backdrop's default page template, which should at least get your content coming out without any errors. It's not going to look pretty for the rest of the theme, but at least it's a start. So at this point, you should see at least the content from the header appearing and the content from the rest of your site appearing. In general, I don't like starting a theme from the homepage. I feel like the homepage is always an exception to what your theme is doing. And so it's easiest for me to start on a basic page or a post. In this case, I'm going to go to the about page and I'm going to start there. So this is a node. It is basic page node, which is usually the simplest content type on a site. So it's also a great starting place for a theme. And then you can extend the basic page node style for everything else on your site. And it usually works out pretty well. All right, so everything is a little bit of a mess. Does not look at all like the Drupal 7 site we had planned. If I go to a page on the Drupal 7 site, similarly, it's I copied the content from Backdrop so it would look even more same, but it does at least have all the right pieces. Okay, so the next thing that I usually do on a theme, whether it's a Drupal theme or a Backdrop theme, starting from scratch reporting, is I start with a header, because I feel like that's often what gives your site the most of its personality, is the way that looks. And in Backdrop, something that's significantly different from Drupal is that there is a header block, and then there's a template file for that block. Where in Drupal, header was baked into the page template, the one that we've now disabled. So what I'm going to do in Backdrop is copy the header template that comes from core. So that is in core. Modules, system, templates, header. Sorry, copy. Oh, geez. Okay. So I have a symlink here and my site doesn't like it. So let's try it differently. Core, modules, system, templates, header to Aberdeen templates. Okay, so now I should have, oh, where'd it go? What happened? Does anyone see? That's what happens when you clear things. Okay, copy. Oh, that's why. Copy. Okay, Aberdeen templates. You always think you're good at typing until people are watching you, and then you realize you're not. Okay, so now I have a header.tpl.php file. And when I just copy that file directly from system module into my theme, it should not look any different than it did if you didn't have that file, because it's overriding the default one. But in order to make it actually use my file, I need to clear the theme registry. So just as an example, to make sure my file is being used, if I add like hello into the template file and then just reload the page, it's not going to show the hello. But as soon as I flush the theme registry, it will say hello on my page. So now I know that it's using my template file. Okay, so I don't want it to say hello, so I'm going to remove that. But this is where it gets a little tricky, because at this point, I need to get the header information out of the layout file that I'd renamed earlier and put it into my new header template. So I go to the layout file, And here I noticed that there are a couple of regions on the page, or areas on the page, divisions technically, that have IDs that identify a particular part of the page as the header. And within that header section, we have a main menu, a secondary menu, and then a chunk of code, which I believe is equivalent to the header block on a backdrop site. So on a backdrop site, we have a header region in the layout template. So if I just go to configure this layout, cancel, you can see there's a header block, and then there's primary navigation. All of this is inside a header region. And so in order to map that to the page template in Drupal 7, I identified the header region. I took out the main menu and secondary menu in this case, and I've identified what else is there. And I think that's the header. So I'm going to copy this code from the old page template and drop it into the new header template. And my indentation is a little silly here.
May I ask a question, or
yes.
Should we ask questions afterwards? So why another approach could be to have a look at the template and to build it directly in the layout. Why don't you do that?
I'm not sure I understand the question. Build what into the layout?
So you, as far as I understand, you're copying the backdrop header information or template in the Drupal one.
I did it the other way around. I copied the Drupal, the code from the Drupal 7 template into the backdrop header template. Yeah. Yes,
but you could alternatively have a look at it, see what it does, and then just rebuild it directly in the layout configuration. Isn't that possible?
I don't think. I mean, maybe if you had a block for site name and a block for logo and a setting to link them and configurations for like what heading tag, that might be possible. I've never done that. I usually just use the header block because the header block is, I find, more synonymous to what Drupal did, where they have one giant header thing. And usually the header, I mean, it also depends on your theme. Like if your theme doesn't print a site logo or a site name and just hard codes in a specific image or background image or something, you might not want to use the default header block. But in this case, it includes a logo and a site name. So it seemed like a good comparison to the system header block, which includes a logo and a site name. So I just think it's easier. I haven't tried it the other way though, so.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so here we have H1 header tag for site name if it's the front page. And then if it's not the front page, it uses just a div tag, it looks like, for a site name. So what I'm going to do is compare the code that was in Drupal 7 to the code that we have in Backdrop and see if there's anything that we want to add. And I usually do this because I like to think that the markup in Backdrop is more modern or more sophisticated than what was done 10 years ago. That might not be true of the theme you're working with. It could be that the theme you're working with is already compensated for Drupal's 10-year-old markup. But I usually like to check anyway. So what I'm looking for here is the logo anchor tag has rel as home on it. It looks like here the logo anchor tag also has a rel as home on it, so that's good. There's a class on the anchor tag of logo. I don't know if the theme needs that or not, but that could be something I might want to also add to the anchor tag here. Some themes use that logo class elsewhere, like on the image tag. This one uses an ID instead. So it would just be up to you whether you want to keep any of that. Also, if you look at the image alt tag here, the Backdrop version has the alt text of home. The Drupal version had the alt text of the site name. So if that's something that you, well, it looks like site name and then space home. So if that's something that you wanted to retain, we would leave that the way Drupal 7 had it and not the way Backdrop had it. So that is the code for the logo tag. So I'm going to go ahead and remove backdrops because we got that. And then the next information for site name, it's sitting in the middle of the H1 tag or in the middle of the div tag without any additional wrappers around it. So in the backdrop version, there's a lot of like name and slogan wrapper, div wrapper, strong tag. I don't think we need any of that stuff in the new template file, but it is all there if you want to have it. So in this case, I'm going to assume that the site name is taken care of. It looks like we don't actually want the slogan printed at all in here for this theme. So I'm just going to remove the entire site name and slogan section. Here we also have a nav for header menu, and I didn't see this in the Drupal theme, but they did use the header menu as the secondary menu in their template. So I'm just going to leave it in our template in the same way. So one thing that we notice here is that if you look at the markup for the Drupal menu, it's got a UL tag with no wrapper around the outside of it. So if I was going to be true to the Drupal 7 markup, I would probably remove the nav tag and just leave the UL. But because I think that the nav tag might help with accessibility for Backdrop, I might want to add that. So this is, again, sort of beauty is the eye of the beholder thing. Like, do you want the nav tag? Keep the nav tag. If you don't want the nav tag, remove the nav tag. But I don't think it's going to mess with my CSS. So for now, I'm going to leave it. If later I find out that that's a problem and we need to remove it, I will come back and remove it. So there's a header. This is what was from Drupal. This is left over from Backdrop. And if I go to my Backdrop site and reload the page, we should now have a slightly different header markup. So we now have, I'm not sure if you guys can see my, let's see if I can make this text bigger, markup here. But here's the header from Drupal, where we now have just the site name, anchor tag, image. And if you guys are following along with your site, there's a setting in Backdrop that allows you to use your image that's provided with the theme that's not set by default. So I did have to go into configuration, system, site information, and check the box that says use the logo supplied by the active theme. That's something that is located elsewhere in Drupal, so it could be tricky to find. And that's what got the funny, I don't know, what is that, a asterisk logo to appear over the Backdrop site. Okay, so I have an approximate similar heading or header area. The next thing that is the most different is the layout. But before I get into layout, because this is a node, I usually also like to check the recent log messages, because I have a feeling that we are doing some stuff in our node template in Backdrop that is different than what we did in Drupal. So this is something I often will keep open as I'm working on a module port or a theme port or creating new layouts, just to make sure that I'm not doing something the Drupal way, because that's the way my mind likes to think of it, instead of doing it the Backdrop way. And I know for a fact that in the Drupal or in the Drupal node template, there's a lot of places where we just print out variables that we assume are going to be strings, but in Backdrop, they're now arrays. And part of this is because we removed the process layer in Backdrop, so that everything that's an array needs to be flattened into a string at the moment that it's printed into a template. It doesn't do it ahead of time. And so because I usually like to copy and paste and not write code myself, because I work in open source, what I'm going to do is open the core node template file so I can see how it's done in Backdrop core. And so this is in the core modules node module. In the node module, there's a template directory in which is a node.tpl.php file. And here you can see some of the differences between the Backdrop markup and the Drupal markup. For example, in Drupal, the opening tag was a div. In Backdrop, it's an article. In Drupal, we just print the classes as though it was a string. And in Backdrop, we have to print implode the classes because it's an array. So we separate them by a space. And then the same thing with attributes. In Drupal, we just printed the attributes. And in Backdrop, we call print Backdrop attributes to flatten an attributes array into a string. And so because I am a little weary about making those changes manually, I'm just going to copy the entire opening tag for Backdrop, which is article, and I'm going to drop that into the opening tag for this theme. And then because this is an article and not a div tag, I need to also update the matching closing tag to be an article. Now, in some themes, it uses the selector div dot whatever, like div dot node, and that this wouldn't work. Like you'd want to make sure that in order for your CSS to work, it would attach to only the class or use the correct selector. But because I've already been through the CSS for this theme and I know that it doesn't do that, I know this is a safe change to make. So this is the kind of thing where you might want to try it and see what happens to your site and see if it changes the CSS drastically or not. In this case, now it's going to work, and there won't be a huge difference here looking at my about page, but I can check it out. The reason it's not going to look very obvious yet is because none of my layout CSS is sticking, but what I'm working on is going through all of my log messages and trying to get all of the PHP notices to go away. So if I reload that page and go back to the log page, it'll tell me all of the places where I'm doing things wrong in my code, which is handy. So here's line 94 of my node template. So go back to my node template file. I'm doing the same thing here with content attributes, where in backdrop we would explode or backdrop attributes, the content attributes. One thing to note here is that the backdrop default classes for node content is content and clearfix. And in this theme, they have removed the clearfix class. So if I'm just going to do a global replace, I need to remember to take out that clearfix class too. They probably did that for a reason. So now if I go and clear my log messages, refresh the page again, go back to my log file, we should have gotten rid of all of the errors, which is good. There are a couple of other things that I like to check for in that template too. Making sure that things are printed out correctly. In Drupal, we have print render title prefix. In backdrop, we have print render title prefix. So just making sure that anything is rendered or exploded is done properly. It looks like we're okay. One thing to note here is that in the backdrop template, we include the comments wrapper inside the node template. Whereas in the Drupal version, there's no comments in here. It just said print render comments. There's no comment template. But the theme did include, where did my window go over here? A comment dash wrapper template file. And so we would take the contents of comment wrapper and put it into node. Let me close this. So here is our comment section. And some indenting problems. Okay. And so this is another difference between the way Drupal and Backdrop handle their node markup, is rather than having a bunch of separate template files, we kind of put them all together. Again, here we have problems in our template with attributes being printed instead of called backdrop attributes, and classes being printed instead of calling backdrop classes. So if we looked at our node template, we might be able to see how that's being handled differently. Here we have a section. Doesn't look like there's any attributes here at all, actually. It's not the one I want, this one. Here it's a div. ID is comments is the same. Class. Looks like we don't have any classes. I don't know if these exist or not, but just to be safe, we should probably do it this way. So print implode classes. And we can see, we can check the markup later to see if these match. So here's implode classes. And then attributes. That's the same variable. So it's definitely not what we want here. Let's just do this first, class comment. We'll come back and look at this later. Link. And then attributes, this would be node attributes if it just printed this way. So we're just gonna leave that out. Okay, and then it's a section. I don't know if you guys want a section or not. We could do that too. Here's a section. I'm gonna put it here. Here. We don't have any comments to test on a page, but if we wanted to go to a post and see what comments look like, we could do that. Let's see. I think in the backdrop version, there was an if statement for if there was comments. We should probably put that. Section tag inside. Section. Wow. I don't know. Worry about that later. But yeah, we don't have any comments. We have comment heading, so it would be good to like put the section tag in there. But I don't know. Parenthesis, colon, question mark. Okay, and if. A lot of typing. Not very good at. Okay. No, it's still there. I don't know what content comments is in this case. It might be like content comments. I don't know. So I would want to look at the content of this and see what it is it's supposed to have. It's probably like content comments items or something like that. I don't have develop on right now, but we could check it out if we needed to. But let's move on from comments because there's more stuff to do. What I would then do, I would assume this node template is not quite done, but when it's done, it will look something like this. It should be pretty close. I'm not looking for information here about what that might be, but it's not. So the next thing I want to do that'll make the biggest difference for the way this page looks is to tackle the layout problem. So right now we have none of the CSS is really working exactly as it should. And part of that is, if you look at the CSS for this theme, I think it's all in one file called style. All of the selectors that they use for layout stuff here start with IDs. So layout section here. And none of these IDs exist in our backdrop layout. So the easiest thing to do to just make the current theme layout identifiers work would be to take a backdrop layout that was similar and add the selectors in where they expect to find them. So I do this by looking at the Drupal site, inspecting the markup, I just want bigger, figuring out where they expect to find each of these selectors and adding them where I want to see them. So to start, I'll start with a header because that has the biggest color difference and it should be pretty obvious when we get it correct. And it looks like immediately inside the body tag, they have a wrapper dash header ID, and that spans across the entire length of the page. And then inside that, they have a narrower one called header. And so if we look at what's going on in the backdrop template, we have something similar where we have a header tag that goes all the way across the entire width of the page. And inside the header tag, we have a header inner container that controls the width of the page. So that looks like a very clear mapping for me, what they intended to do in Drupal and what we're doing in Backdrop. And so in order to make the CSS match, I'm going to take the layout that we're working on now, copy the template file into the theme, and add the IDs where I need them. So this layout is the Moscone layout. So I will, just as I copied the core header template file, I'm going to copy the core Moscone layout template file. And so that will be in, let me have this problem again. Okay, copy core layouts Moscone, layout Moscone into Aberdeen templates. So now we should have a layout dash dash Moscone template file. And this is using the normal theme system where there's a layout.tpl.php in core that is equivalent to our Boxton template. It's a single one column one. And then for every additional layout, there's a theme hook suggestion, which is one of these things that's separated by dash dash in the template name of layout Moscone. So in this case, we're providing a template layout Moscone that'll override the Moscone template file from core. So if we go ahead and open that, we will check for the same parts of the page where we want to add our identifiers. So in the header tag, and because Backdrop core doesn't have any IDs in its stuff. It has these classes that are specified by this L- indicator. We have the ability to just add the IDs directly in here. I would actually argue that using classes is better, and we'll talk a little bit about why we should do that. Switch these to use classes instead in a minute. But for now, just to get it working, we're going to go ahead and add the IDs and see what happens there. So in our style sheet, we have wrapper-header. And you can copy this from your style sheet. You can copy it from the markup on the page. Sometimes I find that easier. And then in the inner one, ID equals. So we did it from the markup on the page here too. Here's Drupal 7. The inner one is just straight header. And copied in here. Oop, in here. And then in order to make it work, we again need to rebuild the theme registry because the system's currently using the default one. So if I go back to clear theme registry, oh, that's Drupal 7. Go back to clear theme registry and backdrop, we should start to see the header styles appear just by adding the IDs in the right places. So we're going to do the same thing with the rest of the page to make that snap into place. If we look at what's going on in Drupal, after the header tag, there is a div with an ID of wrapper-main. In Backdrop, there's a div with L wrapper as a class. So we're going to instead add an identifier of wrapper main. And then inside wrapper main in Drupal, there's a ID of main. So inside here, we will add the ID of main. And then if I reload this, oh, that's Drupal again. Reload the Backdrop page, we should start to see it falling into place, which is nice. Then if we go ahead and take a look at, here's wrapper main. The way that this theme handled, we'll do footer too, because that's straight away pretty straightforward. But the way that this theme handled its layouts is also something usually themes do, right? Where they handle the floating of columns or stacking, however they want to handle the positioning. Because Backdrop's layout system does that for us, we have the option to remove the layout handling in the theme and rely on Backdrop's core handling if we wanted to. We also could switch to a different layout system that might use a different way that it does columns. What I'm going to do here is switch to Core's version because that's the simplest thing to do. And also, I would hope guaranteed best to work, but we will see. Okay, so let's see. Header, main, I don't see footer. Let's see where footer goes here. Footer is actually inside wrapper main in this theme. So in Backdrop, footer is outside Backdrop header main. So what we're going to do is move the entire footer section. Is it inside wrapper main, but not main? So it's below main. This one is main in our world. And so footer would just go right in there like that. This one we still need outside. Don't copy all your divs in the wrong places. So we moved footer inside wrapper main and outside main. Just for sanity, I might also add the identifiers into the comments here, so that as I'm looking at the closing tags, I can tell which tags match to which. But for now, we'll try and bumble along without it. There's Drupal 7, here's Backdrop. And we've got the powered by centered on the right-hand side. Then we'll take a look at the columns because this is tricky. So if we look inside wrapper main, it looks like we have, oh, this is the Backdrop. Maybe we should take a look at what Drupal 7 is doing first. Okay, so inside main, there's an div with an ID of content that represents the right-hand side of the page that has all the content in it, and a div with the ID of sidebar first that represents the left-hand side of the page. And if you look at the CSS for these two parts of the page, there's a bunch of floats in here and fixed widths and margins that are controlling the positioning of these layouts. We want to remove that from this theme and either rely on what's in core or using a different layout that might use a different grid system or however that's handled. I'm going to remove it. So if we look at how layouts are handled in Backdrop, We also have this main area of the page. It happens to be a main tag, and we have a sidebar tag. And so that very closely matches to the IDs that they had before. So I'm going to go ahead and add those in here also. So here is our main tag. And theirs was found content. So I'm going to add ID content and then their sidebar. Here is sidebar dash first. Okay, but if I do this, I will be combining their CSS for handling layouts with core CSS for handling layouts, and it won't work. So I'm also going to go into the style sheet and remove their handling of columns, which is a float left. They have one on the sidebar second also, which we're not using. And it was pound content. But here has a float right. We'll remove that. They also have some widths in here. Here's a center also. So where is their center class? Okay, so here is content, and then center is inside content. So on Backdrop's layout, it's almost like they have a second inner div here that we don't have. The center. Add that one. Put this indentation. Okay, back to Backdrop. All right, now we need to figure out float, main, left, sidebar left, right. Oh no, it's not. Width, margin. Starting to get things back in the same place. I don't know what this is. Main. Wrapper main. Definitely seems to be something wonky going on here. What are those guys? Oh, it's the menu. Okay, so we haven't handled the main menu yet. We could do that now. So the reason our layout isn't going to snap into place is because this menu is in the way. I kind of want to finish the layout first. Okay, well, we'll try and figure out how to do it without the positioning of the menu fixed. But let's see. Okay, so in our styles, we were looking at layout stuff. So header block is probably fine. We're going to leave that alone. Wrapper main doesn't have any stuff in it. Main area. So, and we can also come back and adjust widths and margins and stuff later if we need to. I'm just going to remove it now and see how close we can get it. I'm going to change, keep the top margin, but remove the side margins. Remove float. We probably don't need either of these. So maybe I didn't need that div with the center. These are widths again. Content probably doesn't need width, and then we're to footer. Okay, so let's see how that looks. Getting a little better. So we at least have the left sidebar on the left and the main content area on the right. But you'll notice we also have some mess a little bit with the header and the tabs and the breadcrumbs are all squished together. Where on the Drupal 7 site, all of that stuff fell into the right-hand column here. So what I would probably do is go into the template and move all of the stuff that's supposed to be into the right-hand column into the right-hand column. So in the template file, we have this new center column area where on the Drupal site, we have breadcrumbs, which in Backdrop are in a special region. So if we were to look at the Backdrop layout, breadcrumbs are in a block that are placed in the top region. So in the Backdrop layout, I would find the top region, which happens to be right here, and I would place it in into the main content area. That should help a little. Ta-da. Then the title also needs to be moved, right? The page title needs to go below that. So this is also something you can fix by looking at the old layout template. You wanted to see how this is all organized. So inside wrapper main, you can see we have a region called header, which we don't have the same equivalent region in Backdrop. We have the site slogan. So that might be, I don't know, that could be pre-processed in if you needed it to be. It could also be removed if you didn't want to have it in this new theme. You could add a region there if you wanted it to be in a region. I'm just going to ignore it for now. We'll assume that maybe we don't want to have site slogans anymore. It will be placed in a block. And then inside the content area, we have the breadcrumb. So this is what's in currently our top region block. Then we have a new region we don't have in Backdrop, or a Drupal 7 region called highlighted we don't have. Then we have all of this crazy tab business. So if we look at the way this looks here, we have a wrapper for tabs. Then we have the page title. Then we have a secondary set of tabs and a set of action links, a help region we don't have in Backdrop, and then messages. So this is roughly page title, tabs, action links, messages. So if we go to ours, we have page title here. Geez, the indentation on this thing is terrible. Tabs and action links. Again, terrible indentation. Just go. And then messages at the bottom. Okay, and so in order to see where all of that comes out in Drupal 7, I'm going to do a flush all caches so I can see where messages print. Maybe, there it goes. So it should be breadcrumbs, page title, tabs, messages, and then if there were any like action links or whatever else that would come out at the bottom. We're going to do the same thing in Backdrop. We should see on the right hand side breadcrumbs, page title, tabs, messages. We're all a little stacked up and squished together because if you noticed in the Drupal 7 template, there was this extra div, this tabs wrapper div was only printed around the title if there were tabs. And so we would need to copy that same handling into our layout. So here is our page title. We're going to add this extra div, and it goes around. So this is tricky too. The tabs are printed in the same line here as this if statement. So we need to make sure if we add this into ours, we then don't print the tabs twice. So what we could do is remove tabs here, print the div, and add our tabs ahead of that. Oh, no, we've got an if statement there too. That's fine. This also has ifs. So yeah, a little messy. It's a little messy here.
I have a question.
Sure, go for it.
So this seems to me like it's sort of hard coding the order of these things in the theme rather than letting people do this from the layout.
All themes need, all layouts need to hard code all of these things, but they are all always overridable from the layout.
Okay, because I thought these were blocks that you could put in the layout and then just rearrange at will.
Right. So that there, with Backdrop, you can't always move these things around on the page. And as soon as you put like a tabs block, this thing will disappear. But you absolutely have to put them in the template file also, because if somebody doesn't have that block placed, these things need to be printed to the screen.
Okay.
So you can choose, like, if you aren't particular about where they go, you would like put them all in, you know, one particular part of the page and be like, this is the junk block where everything else goes. And you can put a note in your theme that's like, you might want to place these things somewhere more sensible. But coming from Drupal 7, they've almost all themes have had to place this stuff already, or hopefully they had placed it already, because it's also required in Drupal 7 the same way it's required in Backdrop. So I'm just trying to copy what they did. But in Backdrop, we do have the option of allowing people to move them, which was not an option in Drupal 7 unless you added the block page elements module or something. There was something that allowed you to do it. It's a little hacky, but it totally worked.
And also to confirm, this is only going to work if people use the Moscone layout. If they use a different layout with this theme, it's not going to work or something. Or?
Right. So in order for this theme to support all core layouts, which it should before we release it, we will need to make these same changes to every template file in core. So there are 10 core layouts. We don't need to support the legacy ones, but there are 10 core layouts. We would need to take our finished code here when we get it done and copy and paste, for example, the position of the page title, the tabs, the action links, the messages into the correct position in the other templates also.
Okay, yeah, makes sense.
So let's see how we're doing. Okay, a little better. We're missing some of the styles, but at least all of the stuff is coming out in the right order. So I would guess the styles are also related to our identifiers. So if we take a look at what page title did in Drupal, it looks like the H1 tag has a with tabs class. We need to make sure that that with tabs class gets added to our H1 tag in Backdrop as well. So I'm going to copy the H1 tag from Drupal and drop it into our H1 area for Backdrop. So there's also in Backdrop, we had a different class here of page title. If you wanted to include the page title class, you'd need to do a little bit more work here. I'm assuming that they don't need the page title class in the theme, so I'm going to leave it out. But you could, of course, choose to leave that in there also. And so now we have a better layout. Oh, that's Drupal 7. A better layout where the tabs are now appearing next to the About area. We are still missing this like faint underline, which is probably important. It looks like it's coming from the tabs wrapper div, which also has a clear on it. We should have that. Let's see what's going on here. Tabs wrapper with a clear on it. Border bottom, not front. Aha. Okay, so in Drupal, you automatically got the not front class added to the body tag on any page that wasn't the front page. On Backdrop, we don't have that. We've kept the front class on the homepage, and we don't have the front class on subpages. So there is a way that you can write a selector, and I'm not super great at front end stuff, that instead of being has this class, it could be like doesn't have this class. Or if you wanted to make your markup identical to what it was in Drupal, which is probably what I would recommend if you're porting a theme, you can add this class in the same way that Drupal added it. And when Drupal added classes to the body tag, it put it in using a preprocessed function, which we do still have in Backdrop, for the correct template file. So the body tag comes out in Backdrop in the HTML template file. So we would need Aberdeen preprocess HTML. And in here, we would use this check if Backdrop is front page, and we want to negate it when we add the class. Then we do this variables, $, classes, and then we add a new class, and we're going to call it not front. And just how when you add a new template file, you need to add flush your theme registry cache. We have to do the same thing. This is Drupal 7. To make it appear here. Body, it didn't work. Pre-process HTML, Backdrop is front. Variables. What am I doing wrong? Can anyone see? Try again. Page. Let's double check. Our body tag definitely comes out in the HTML file, but we can check anyway. So here is system module. Here is the template file. I don't see HTML. Oh. Oh, because we named it page. Ha. See, I'm thinking like Drupal again. Okay, so here is HTML and body tag. We renamed this in Backdrop to page. Okay, let's try that again. Special cache theme registry. Ta-da, and there's the underline. Okay, it looks like we have a little CSS mix up here with the theme registry stuff. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time going through each of these things. I expect it's probably like we need an ID, we used a class, same sort of thing where you can go through and update the CSS or the markup to match. Instead, I want to fix this menu thing. And part of this is because, and this is going to be one of the trickiest things as usual with the theme styling, the menu is pretty tricky. We have a responsive, touch-friendly, accessible drop-down menu in Backdrop, and Drupal did not. And so all of the styles that Drupal put on its menus in contrib themes and sometimes custom themes too doesn't account for this crazy drop-down menu behavior. It doesn't account for the drop-down menu markup. It's all a little bit messy. I would recommend trying to adapt the CSS rather than trying to adapt the markup of the smart menus output, whereas most of the other stuff I've done on this page so far is adapt the markup to make it fit. And part of that's because I don't think, even if we got the markup to be very similar to what we had, it wouldn't be sufficient because the theme's not going to account for drop-down menus. So I would say take a stab at cleaning up the CSS instead. The one thing that I would like to work on is the positioning of these things. So in Drupal 7, the menu is positioned on the right with cute little tab style. In Backdrop, we need to get that same sort of thing to happen. We have a block inside a region, which is a little bit different on a markup level than what was in the Drupal 7 theme, where the menu was in the header. But because we still have a wrapper around both of these things, in our case, it's the region is header, and then we have a block for the system header block, and then the menus come after it. So I know this is kind of complicated, not saying things clearly, but if we look at the layout, our page structure is similar enough. So we have a bunch of wrappers that represent our region, and then our header block and our navigation are inside those wrappers. In Drupal 7, it was similar, where there were wrappers that represented the region, and then they had both the site name stuff and the menus in the same thing. So what I would do is try to, for the most part, get things similar. So if it looks like the classes in Drupal 7 are applying to the LIs and the As in the CSS, what I would probably go and do is check out the CSS for the menu. And I'd see how they're trying to target things. And it looks like they're using ul.main_menu as their main identifier. So here is ul.main_menu, and that's just the UL tag that wraps around the outside of everything. And so if we were to find the same, still editing this layout, if we were to find the same one for our menu, it is ul.menu dropdown. So I might start by trying to just do like global find and replace for ul.menu and ul.menu dropdown. See what happens. Global find and replace, always scary. But hey, it gets it close, right? So that's kind of a good step in the right direction. There's going to be a bunch of like nitpicking you're going to have to do to make sure that all the selectors all the way down are specific enough to override what Smart Menus does. You can at least see how sometimes you can get most of the way there that way. I think I did the same thing with the secondary links. In this case, we have a nice little nav tag we can use to identify them. In Drupal, it just used the menu. It doesn't look like it used any specific selectors at all. It's just the UL in general. So we might want to, there it is, secondary dash menu. So we might want to replace like selectors for secondary menu with something like, secondary menu with dot header menu dot links, something like that.
Jen,
Yes.
you should do a process check-in. It's been about an hour.
Okay.
So how do you want to proceed? Because I don't know, people probably, I'm sure some people have deadlines here that they have to. Okay. Well, let's see. So one last thing I want to say, and then we can stop working on the actual port since we're getting kind of close, is that the biggest thing here for layout support is trying to make like the layout that Drupal wrote match to the layout system that Backdrops now provides, or layout that the Drupal 7 theme wrote. And the way that I did that initially was to go through and add identifiers everywhere. Because Drupal's layout system already has consistent classes that work across all those layouts, it'll save you a lot of time if you can take your theme and adapt it to work with the existing core classes, rather than trying to add, like in this case, identifiers to every one of those same regions. So what I would do with this theme is do a global find and replace on like pound footer with L-footer, so that you're switching out the layout-based IDs, the layout-based classes that are in Backdrop, and then that change would affect all core layouts. So you wouldn't need to go through and edit all of them individually. If you need to move things on the layout, unfortunately, like we did with placing the header or the title inside a particular region, that is something that you need to copy all of the layout template files for. So for this particular theme, you are still going to need to copy all 10 layouts, but you don't have to go through and update all of the identifiers on all of them. You just move the regions to where you want them to be on the page. There's a couple of other things we didn't talk about in the pre-process area. This theme has a process function for page. That's obviously not going to work in Backdrop. So this would get converted to a pre-process function. We would want to make sure that it was going to be doing the same things in the same places, but that's a change that would need to work. And then it had a function that affected HTML. As we found the hard way, we don't have an HTML
template file in Backdrop. So this code would need to be moved to Page instead to get the same effect. So there's just a couple of little things like that. Theme functions in general are exactly the same as they were in Drupal 7. So any theme overrides will be similar. You just want to make sure that if there were improvements in those theme functions in Backdrop, if you want those in your Backdrop site, even using a Drupal 7 theme, you just have to double check that they're still there. So things like article tag in the node template. Do you want that? You might have to change that. Otherwise, if you want exactly the same markup as Drupal, you can do it that way. I want to stop talking about like actually this particular bit of code and see if you guys have questions about how this might apply to working on other themes or anything we didn't talk about that you might be curious about for porting.
Anybody have any questions?
Okay, if there aren't any questions, I recommend we move on to showing off what Tim's been working on.
Well, the meetings went long. We could skip that. I have some questions, but I'm not sure we can get to them all. I'll just say that I think what was really helpful for me that I've been having a hard time wrapping my head around was how to port a Drupal 7 theme to Backdrop with the change in how layouts work, right? I haven't quite understood that, and this has been helpful a lot. I mean, the idea that we might have to actually override all of the core templates. I think I've heard you say that before, but I'm only now starting to process that. That makes sense. So
yeah, I mean, the only major reason for that is because if you release a theme as a contrib theme, you want whoever it is to be able to change their layout and still have it look somewhere within the realm of what the person who designed the theme wanted it to look like. Whereas like right now, if I go to the homepage, oh well, it's I already broke it. But if I were to go to the homepage, right. It would. Let's see. We can just make this process again. It would look nothing like the theme that we had just built because there's no styles that apply this to the homepage template. Now, for a custom theme, like if you're writing a theme for your own site and your own site only uses 3 layouts, you only need to compensate for or adjust for those 3 layouts. So I definitely have done that too. You can go into the layout UI and disable the layouts that aren't supported, and then it works just fine. But because with contrib, you don't have no control over what other people are using, it should support all 10 out of the box.
Okay. I could just go back and rewatch this, but if you could clarify, I was a bit distracted. So were you actually hard coding in a sense some of the title and the logo into the layout for this theme?
No, so I didn't hard code the title and the logo. What I did is I took the header template file, and they're still printed out here where like if you upload a logo, it'll print whatever logo you upload. If you change the site name, it'll still print out whatever site name you put in. So it's not hard coded. The position of them is determined by what's in the header block. Okay. So as long as you use the header block, you'll get this markup. But if you wanted to pull out just the site name or just the logo outside of the header block, I haven't ever done that before. Apparently it's possible. You could position them wherever you wanted, and then you wouldn't, this markup, this theme's CSS for that markup wouldn't apply.
Okay.
But yeah, I usually do this first or second thing is to get the header.tpl.php to match the markup I want for the site header. It usually makes the biggest difference in terms of being able to see this as a specific theme rather than just a generic site.
Good.
So, Tim?
Yeah.
Maybe I have a question similar to your one. So I was asking about the goal of porting a theme because now, Jen, you worked a lot on layout questions and positioning of the markup. And I was also asking me, or my approach would be, so maybe it's not the best, but I would just have a look at the theme, at the look and feel of a theme, and then only work on the CSS. and leave the rest to the layout system in backdrop. And that is not really porting a theme. It's not identical after that, but it's everyone can adapt it for its own goals in backdrop.
I actually have done that a lot with my own stuff too, because I've found that you can do a lot with CSS now, a lot more than you could do 10 years ago. And so before, we used to need to add extra divs to get what we can do now with pseudo selectors. And so sometimes I feel like you want to do that update anyway. And I have no problem with doing that for any of my own custom stuff. For the contrib stuff, I'm a little bit more worried about it, because it could be that somebody had created like a sub theme off of the Drupal theme that isn't going to work because the markup doesn't line up anymore. So I don't know. My gut would be like, create a 1.x version that's exactly the same as the Drupal 1.x version, and then bump the version number and do a 2.x version that removes all the markup changes and just does it with CSS. And that way, people who are coming from Drupal could throw out their theme and write a new one in the new way, or they could just port their current theme and use it, and it would work too. That is twice the work. So I don't expect that to happen for every theme. I would imagine maybe the most popular ones might have that, like something like Bootstrap or, I don't know, Zen could have 2 different ways of using it. But yeah, I would say getting a working version of the theme for Backdrop is more of a priority than having the markup be an exact match. I would probably choose to do it this way first, because I find it, I don't know, for me, less work to get the markup to match. I know that that's not the same as like most theme developers work. They're much better in CSS. But yeah, it's just, I don't know. I'm too familiar with the inner workings of the theme system in Drupal.
Yeah, I see. Okay.
So along those lines, is the reason to port, are we trying to make it easy for people to migrate a site with the Aberdeen theme? Is that part of the reason for doing it the way you're saying?
Yeah, so so right now my primary focus is to make it as easy as possible for people who are already on Drupal 7 to get to Backdrop. And that would be like the end goal of the 1-button push. And if you have a custom theme that's based on a contrib theme, you want it to still work after you push that button. And if the CSS, or if the markup is different, the CSS for your custom theme isn't going to apply anymore after that. And so there's going to have to be some translation from what was there before to what's there after. And that is more work to getting that button push to happen. So that's why I resist that a little bit. But I do think you'll have a better end product if you do things the modern way. And so that's why I've been doing it that way for most of my custom stuff. Most of my clients that have upgraded, they do a redesign at the same time. And I imagine that's probably common for many of these people who are even moving from Drupal 7. And so the need for that upgrade to retain the theme is probably far less great than the need for a module to be able to have that exact same functionality before and after. But I do think that I would like to do it that way, especially for something as simple as this theme, because there's, it doesn't do very much. For a more complicated theme, it's a lot more work to do it both ways.
Okay, interesting. So there's 2 different goals in porting a theme, right? One is just to make more themes available for Backdrop for new sites. The other that you're talking about, which I hadn't really considered that much, is to make it easier for people to migrate.
Yeah.
In which case, we might want to be looking not at the most attractive themes, but the most used themes.
Yeah.
And seeing if we can't get those ported. Okay, interesting. Yeah. Any other questions? I don't know that I'm going to do my thing, but I would like to at least give anybody. Did you have any other last minute thoughts, Jen, about your porting themes?
No, I mean, it's yeah, the hardest thing is I think the change to layouts, and that is also something that initially is very hard to figure out, but once you get the hang of it, then you're like, it's just repeating the same thing 10 times. It's not very much fun, but you do kind of get the hang of like, oh, where does the markup match? Where does it not? Some themes are really, really different in terms of their markup. This one was really similar in terms of it already had 2 wrappers for every region. So depending on what you're starting with, it may match more or less what we have in core. there could be some theme that in order to get exactly the same layout placement as you have in the theme, you need a layout, a custom layout or a contrib layout in addition to your theme in order to get it to be the same. But I still think that theme needs to work with the 10 themes in core. So you're going to need sort of like a design vision for like, how would you adapt this theme for the layouts that we provide? And that doesn't mean you can't rearrange all the markup to match. It just means you have to have the same regions supported. So like for this one, no one ever thought about what it would look like with one column. So I'll have to go back to the homepage and be like, okay, well, if there weren't any sidebars, like, is there a max width on the content or not? Where does the hero go? Right now, the top region is like already jammed into the right sidebar. So there isn't anywhere to have a top region. So just, or anywhere to have a hero. So just stuff like that, where there are new problems we're facing now that weren't problems in Drupal because the theme developer had control over the layout as well. So.
Has anybody here tried porting a site and keeping the theme? I'm just curious. Because I kind of always assume too that I'm just going to redesign and retheme from scratch. So.
Yeah, so I just sent out an estimate today that had, well, 2 estimates for the same project. One of them was like keeping it exactly the same, which is what they asked for. And the other one was build a new theme. And it was much cheaper to do a new theme. So I have a feeling we're going to be facing that a lot.
Well, I will just say this, that part of my interest in this topic was we had a request from a member who was on the call a little earlier. I think he's about having the boilerplate theme in background. And I just thought, I'll see if I can, what it would take to port that. It's a starter theme, right? So it's not a finished theme. It's kind of a framework for developers to build off of. And I started working on that last night. It's in GitHub. If anybody wants to take a look, you can load it right now. It actually loads, but I haven't went through and done a lot of the stuff that Jen showed yet to make it work. But if anybody wanted to help work on that, they could. If anybody has any more questions about this, I recommend posting on the forum.drupal or backdropcms.org. We have a topic specifically for this meetup where you could start a new topic and we can sort of carry on the discussion. I know I'm going to be experimenting a little bit with porting a theme in the next few days, so I'll probably try to post what I'm learning in the forum. And if anybody else is having similar experiences, I'd love to hear what you're doing.
Yeah. Interesting question could be also regarding the 2 approaches. If we port themes from Drupal, which one is the official one? So, or if you, for example, port the boilerplate theme and don't do all the layout and markup stuff, is it maybe good to choose another name for the theme so that it's clear that it's not?
I mean, it's going to be the same theme. It'll just be, if somebody ever needs support for that layout, they'll file a pull request and it'll get added. And eventually you'll get all 10. They don't have to be in there initially, but it could be, someone needs this, contribute. But I think if the markup is, close, if the stuff was ported, we should keep the same name.
Well, only that maybe one could also think that it's maybe better not to have all that old markup in it. Because it's not modern enough and you have a lot of templates that you don't need and so on. Yes. So, and that would be...
that's what I would recommend with the 2 versions, right? Like if, boilerplate on Drupal was 2.0, we have a boilerplate on Backdrop that's 2.0, and then we have a boilerplate that's 3.0. It doesn't have any of that. And it's more work, right? Because now you've got to maintain the person who's running the 2 version, the person who's doing the 3 version. You can recommend that people, when they redo their theme, switch to the newer version. We can watch usage statistics. If no one's using 2.x, then market is not supported or what have you. But yeah, I think keeping it as one project is important. That way we won't get division of labor.
I mean, along those lines, you looked for a theme that needed a maintainer. Are there any other sensitivities about just porting? So I normally, when I imported modules, I have put a note in the Drupal issue queue saying, "Hey, I'm going to port this. Do you want to help me?" With the boilerplate theme, I didn't actually do that yet. It's still my intention to say, "Hey, I did this."
Yeah, I do like
so
to
far
do
I
that.
haven't. Okay.
I do like to do that for every project. I mean, it is open source. We're allowed to take it and redistribute as we want, but I always think that it's nice to extend an olive branch to the people who've already been doing all of the work on the project. So whether that is just letting them know, whether it's offering to let them have control over the backdrop project, or just saying like, I would love your advice if I run into a problem, and having them say, yes, that's fine, I'm too busy, but ask me if you have a question, which is the usual response I get. I think it's good just for being cordial with them to do that. The reason I looked for a project that needed a maintainer for this one is because I felt like I'm only doing this for today's meeting. I'm likely not going to become a serious maintainer for it. And where some of the other themes where I know I am constantly updating and actually taking care of them. And so I didn't want to do something where I was going to create a backdrop version that was going to be more stale than the Drupal version. So I took something that I figured wasn't getting a lot of attention in Drupal. And then if I gave it a little attention, it would still be better than what I had before. That's what I was hoping for.
Okay, we should wrap this up, but if anybody have any other announcements or just something you want to tell us about quick before we, I think, Peter, that maybe we should do another user group soon where we can talk about some of these other projects. This one's long enough. Anybody? Okay. Why don't we, so thank everybody for coming. I think this was probably the best attended virtual user group we had. We had a dozen people at one point, so 12 people. We were doing these about once a month, and I could envision we have a whole number of topics we'd like to cover. So they're a little bit ad hoc, but we'll try to get another one on the schedule very soon. So watch Twitter, watch backdrop.org, also the forum. Okay. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Oh, we got to turn off the recording.
I can't figure out how to stop sharing my screen.